So Steve, let's go back to one of the earlier comments that you made. And if you're in a community and the foundation says, well, we didn't think this was our issue. How are you guys addressing that, or how do you encourage the board to at least open up the conversation around justice, racial justice, economic justice? How do you open up that conversation for folks that may not be fully aware of other people and other communities? What does that look like, especially during these weird times where we're having these heavy conversations over video? And yeah, it's great to have Zoom or whatever, but like it's also nice just to see you in a room and be like, hey, how are you doing? So we all understand Zoom fatigue, but how do you have these?
I'm going to leave it to Tony for the story. I was actually the one I was referring to, but I think part of it is what we've started doing is just being upfront about it in our proposals with people also.
Yeah.
This is part of the issue. When we have the chance to have the conversation with them, when you talk about trends in the field, this is absolutely one of those trends that whether you think it's there or not, it is. And it's probably something, whether your community is asking you about it, you may not be comfortable with it. It's just part of like, it's good to start someplace with this. We're not saying where you're going to end up on this, but at least to kind of test whether this is something that you really are ready to be able to go into, or what are you going to have to do to feel like you're ready to move into it? For some people, it's kind of the advanced work of even saying, we're going to go, we're not going to even be out in front. We're not even going to be behind. We're not going to be beside. We just don't even know. We just really don't know because they haven't really thought about it, I think, in the same way. Maybe they did at some point while all this was happening in the last year, but the one I was particularly thinking of is very near, geographically, was very near one of the major events of last year. And they hadn't been doing anything related to it. And so it was like, you can't really, I'm not sure, how long you can kind of get away with that.
Yeah, just because it's across the river, across the street, yeah.
Yeah.
We have, from a practical standpoint, we have two team members, Brian Frederick and Erica Seth Davies, who have both led foundations through these journeys.
Sure.
Brian led one that's sort of a very suburban kind of community, and Erica's been at a couple different kinds of foundations. And so usually we're having them set context. So there's some common language and frameworks, giving board members just a taste of like what could happen and sort of the why of it. We'll do polling behind the scenes to sort of test where the board members are in thinking about themselves in the journey as well as the foundation in the journey. It often reveals that they're more ready than they think they are as an organization, because the board members are answering, yeah, we should probably do something about this. If we're out doing community conversations, we bring it up like, what do you see going on in the community? And so we try to set all that energy to there to say, there's a lot going on here. There's opportunities for you to at least learn yourselves and then figure out how to navigate the external piece of it later. So far we haven't had anybody tell us not to do it.
Right.
How fast they move on it will be a different thing.
It's interesting too, because you don't always have to ask the question about, equity, justice. Sometimes in the course of, as we're doing interviews with people in the community, they're the ones who are bringing it up, which is really powerful to come back to the board.
Well,
and with that information to say, hey, this is,
let's hit pause for a second, because that was one of my questions as to where these conversations are starting, because are they starting with EAC? Are they starting at the board level, the new staff, senior staff, the community writ large, the community organizations? Folks want to talk about, exactly. Folks want to talk about racial justice and recognize that we do not have racial justice in this country, period, right? And how then do we at least acknowledge that and then plan for a new future? So it seems like the conversations are happening all around, and sometimes they, zero in, and sometimes it's one of these, well, we'll have that conversation later, or what are you saying, I guess?
I think it's almost all of those, right, Tony? I was thinking, as you're going through it, it's like, well, who else have we left out that's not on that list, right? I think that, We do see this often, though. Oftentimes, where there is momentum for it, for the most part, staff is ahead of the board
Yeah.
on where they are with this because they're living it every day. They're really, they're steeped in the work. They're in the community. They see these things kind of play themselves out on a daily basis. Not board members aren't concerned about it. And we've had a lot of great conversations with boards about this, but that tends to be, you need to have the leadership of the organization, whether it's staff or the board leadership, really needs to at least be saying, we have to look at this. This is something we have to be thinking about in our community, wherever they are in that process. I think is where you can get momentum on it. It's much more difficult, I think. It's not impossible, but like I said, we are hearing things as we're doing interviews with people to be able to bring back to them to say, hey, this is something you may want to think about because there's some of your major donors are concerned about this issue. They're talking about it. Or if they're not talking about it, they're talking about some of the outcomes that they don't even realize are connected to it, right? But they're talking about those things. Yeah.
You'd asked about COVID earlier, Mark. So many community foundations, and you probably saw it too. The COVID response opened the door for racial conversations as well, because they had to get money out the door, and they had questions about like, well, here, and it's also for conversation later, they also got them into their first conversation about impact investing and loans to businesses. And so suddenly they had this sort of contained universe to try these things out in, and it gave them some lift internally to say, oh, look, we saw ways to help Black entrepreneurs in our community or Latino community entrepreneurs in our community through COVID. And that helped us learn a lot about this population that we had never met before, or people with disabilities or something. And so that gave them some openings to then take the conversation into the rest of the organization and say, well, what do we need to do about the rest of our grant making or scholarships or anything else?
Yeah, it's just such a fascinating time with these two major issues. And again, of course, there are a number of others that are facing the world, climate change being one of them, one that we need all to pay attention to. As we look, though, at the responses of community foundations, and recognizing too, we're all working from home and all of that, and at some point we'll all go back into an office, whatever that means. I think we're all learning from each other. We're all trying to figure out the best way to be impactful. We're looking at new tools. We're looking at different ideas and partnerships. What trends are you seeing in this space? And everyone loves the word innovation. What innovative ideas have you seen in this space?
I'm not sure innovation is the right word for it.
Sure.
I was thinking of some of it's, I'm going to take what you're doing and I'm going to tweak it a little bit for our community kind of things that people are trying to do. I think the major shift, and this has been something that's been going on in our field for 15 years, is that, but there's still foundations that are just kind of coming onto it, is we want to have a bigger impact. This is no longer just about building assets for our community. Right, that's a great idea, but it's not the end all be all. It's not, hey, we're successful because we have $1 billion or because we have $10 million or whatever that number is for your community. It's like, what are we doing? We've worked with a very small community foundation that has $700,000 in assets. They started from leadership. They started with convening people. They started with bringing the community together around the key issues and said, that's what we're gonna do first, because that's what this community needs. There isn't any organization in this community that can really bring people together, that people trust, that can really have those kind of conversations, and we want to be that place. And it's led them, because they're engaged in those big ideas, has led them to some of the bigger donors, and they're still relatively new, so the assets haven't followed yet, but they're having the kind of conversations that down the way are going to lead to larger assets. They're going to, but because they're involved in the critical issues and they're having those conversations.
Again, showing your leadership, identifying who you are, showing your leadership, and not saying sorry about the ideas and communities that you support. And I agree that people want to see leadership. And that donors want to support folks that are brave enough to speak their minds and support folks and show leadership and engage.
We've been talking a lot with community foundations, especially the ones that are heavy on donor advised funds or other kind of donor designated funds, about donor engaged community leadership. And so you're not just generating this out of scratch. You're not even just generating it about community data and trends, even if they're screaming needs. Like, how early can you bring your donors and fund holders along in that process of learning about a community issue, getting them engaged as collaborative leaders with you? And so you're not just trying to go pitch them something, but they're actually helping you design and develop that, and they're getting better at that. And so, and then, you know, of course, if you ask the donors for sort of advice and information early, they'll be investors later on. And so they're starting to play that out. So I think that's a trend that's good. It's not an innovation, it's a trend. Certainly foundations, same as all kinds of foundations last year, you know, moving into automated fund transfers and EFT kinds of things, trying to simplify things behind the house because they had the chance to reimagine processes. And so they were able to do that and sort of give themselves a permission to be mobile and electronic and all the rest of it. And that was a lift for a lot of them. You know, they had rural boards who didn't want them to do that. It was a big lift for a lot of them. And now the big question is, you had a chance to do streamlined grant making last year. Will you continue some version of more humane streamlined grant making this year that isn't just about COVID, but it's about all the rest of it? And so that's too early to play that out. We're hoping that it sticks for a lot of community foundations. Certainly we bring that question up as we're doing the planning.
Multi-year, unrestricted, that whatever.
Or even just like 12 less questions on the proposal is a good start.
Right.